Populations are declining and poverty is rising in rural school districts. A new report from the New York State Association of School Business Officials shows that nearly 85% of rural districts have seen enrollment decrease of at least 10% in the past decade. Meanwhile, the poverty rate for those districts, for the kids who are left, for the families who are left, rose from 13.7% to 17.7%, which is a significant increase. The association says that these factors combine to create very big challenges for districts and that the state should be aware of that and doing more to assist them. Here to talk about this and some of the possible solutions is the group's executive director, Michael Borges. Welcome back to Capital
Thank you for
Today.
having me.
So before we even get started, it seems to me that the definition of a rural school is outdated. And that's kind of the problem. And that the formula funding that the state is using to get money to these schools is also not up to date.
Well, it's more of the definition of a high need school district that needs to be updated. We are using 2003, 2008 data to define what a high need school district is.
Poverty data, right.
Right, and so, there are a lot of school districts, a lot of particularly rural school districts are being left out of that high need definition, which goes into factoring, their foundation aid, their building aid, and things like that. So I think the first thing we need to do, and this is what we recommended in our foundation aid report and during the budget negotiations and the legislative session, was we use more updated data to calculate aid, which would then drive more money to high need school districts, whether they were rural, urban, or whatever. So, yeah.
Well, what is a rural district then?
Well, it's defined by their geographic sparsity, their population sparsity, their geographic distance, and things like that. So those are the things that go into defining what a rural school district is. I mean, I was just looking at the list. There's like Long Lake is like 400 square miles. There's Saranac Lake is 396 square miles.
Yeah.
So those are rural. So like to put that in perspective, in our area, in the capital region, say Guilderland or Bethlehem, they're like 45, 46 square miles. So, they're, in our view, they're big school districts, but if you look at in comparison to a really rural school district.
So they have unique challenges.
Yes.
Including the first one that comes to mind is transportation.
Right.
So is the state adequately addressing or aware of the fact that, okay, these districts are going to need to spend more on transportation to move a lower number of kids a further number of miles?
Yes, I mean, transportation aid is expense-based, so it's reimbursable. So the more you travel, the more distance you go, the more money you get, the higher the poverty. Again, that factors into your transportation aid. So the state, in certain ways, does take in consideration the special needs of a rural school district. But what the report refers to really is that they're facing a sort of a perfect storm, a trifecta of declining enrollment, aging population, and rising poverty. And all those three combined are overwhelming or having a catastrophic impact on those rural school districts and their capacity to raise additional revenue to support their schools and have the necessary programming, educational programming, so that when they do graduate, they can be successful in their career or college readiness. So, I mean, those are sort of the things that we need to take a comprehensive look at, not only what's happening in the school district, but also what's happening in the total community.
Right. I mean, also, when you talk about poverty, and you make this, address this in the sort of the solutions area of your report, you're talking about kids who come to school with challenges and maybe hunger, maybe a failure to have a significant support system at home, so homework's not getting checked, for example, a lack of stability, violence, etc., and they're not ready to learn.
Right.
So you have a population of kids that already has, when they even walk in the door, issues. And, for example, free and reduced lunch is a problem, right? So you have all of these things that you would like to address, and you say, well, it needs to be a holistic approach, that the state needs to put in place policies that support some of these communities beyond education,
right,
or before education,
right,
really, healthcare, childcare, economic development,
right,
et cetera.
A lot of rural schools have some of the similar societal issues that urban school districts do, but they're compounded by the fact of distance and lack of support services. So, there's a big push for preschool and, universal pre-K. Well, there's not a lot of pre-K providers in rural schools. There's the whole opioid epidemic,
right,
drug use and things like that. Well, in urban areas, they have programming and support services for a lot of that. In rural communities, they don't have it. So even if there was support, there's no money for it. So they have the same issues, but they lack the same support that face urban school districts.
I was surprised to see that you think the state needs to do more to provide targeted incentives and remove roadblocks to collaboration. I thought the governor was all about collaboration. I thought he was trying, so much about collaboration that he wants some of these districts to merge, which is a different conversation altogether.
Right.
But I mean, I thought the administration was really big on incentivizing collaboration.
Well, apparently not well enough, so that where school districts want to collaborate, they're not being incentivized to do so. And I've been on the show a number of times where we talked about where we have a bill that would incentivize school districts to share transportation.
Right.
Where they go through other school districts to a parochial school or to a private placement or special ed. They go through another school district with their own kids, bypassing those other kids to the same destination. There's actually a disincentive for school districts to share transportation.
Which is crazy because the state needs to pay for those kids to get to school.
Exactly.
Just because they're going to private school doesn't mean the state isn't responsible for getting them there.
And then there's regional high schools. That's, the regions have proposed that going back, I don't know, to 2010 or 11 or whatever, and we've proposed it. I think other organizations have proposed it. Regional high schools, again, are a way for schools to keep the communities and keep their own identity while just sharing a high school. And then that would allow more schools or those communities to offer AP classes and other high
because this is what, and again in the report, those are the things that are the first to go.
Right.
So ironically and really sadly, the things that help a kid get college ready or at least get looked at, and when you apply for colleges, is AP, after school, etc. And those are the first things that get cut when a school district is facing difficulty.
Particularly in rural schools, during the height of the Great Recession and during the GEA cuts. A lot of those rural school districts had no AP classes. They didn't have any enrichment programs. They got rid of foreign languages. So their children were graduating with a hollowed out diploma that made them uncompetitive with other schools.
Well, we've had this conversation, and the Regents has also been investigating it, I know. Distance learning, more online collaboration, more Skyping into the classroom, et cetera.
Right.
I mean, does the state need to do more to incentivize that sort of thing?
The state, I think, has made some announcements about expanding broadband
Yep.
and internet access, and that has to be done ASAP.
We've been talking about it. Bond Act, if I recall correctly. Whatever happened to that?
And that is working. I mean, they're buying the technology and they're buying the equipment to make that happen in the school district. But the community itself has to have that access as well.
Right.
So that's something that's happening outside the schools that need to be acted on. And then the other part of it is, again, removing the roadblocks. Why haven't we have regional high schools? Why don't we have more distance learning? Why don't we have all these kinds of things? There are roadblocks, state, regulatory, other kinds of opposition to those kinds of efforts. And we need to remove those roadblocks because these school districts, these rural school districts, will continually be at a disadvantage and will face further, I guess, fiscal and educational stress going down the line.
Is there, when you look 5 years down the road or 10 years down the road, can you foresee a time when we're going to have fewer of these districts? Every couple of years, there's a perennial story about this school in the North Country that has like 3 kids, or, they're busing them in from 500 miles away, it takes 5 hours, whatever. I'm being, a little bit facetious about it, but there are some districts that seem like they shouldn't exist anymore. But for community pride, et cetera, there are, obviously reasons they exist, but maybe it's not economical.
Well, a school district with 400 square miles really can't merge with something else. How long?
No, but maybe the kids at the edges could go, you could shrink it, and the kids at the edges could go somewhere else.
School districts do tuition out, so some school districts decide we're not going to offer a high school, we're going to just tuition our kids out to neighboring school districts. Those school districts have to agree to do that, so they may not want that or not, so that's optional. And then in terms of distance, in terms of mergers, right? Well, do you want two relatively poor or high need school districts merging together to create one big high need school district? So, there are, the only reason why a school district should merge is so to improve the academic climate and the opportunities available to their students. We've talked about this before. We've issued reports. Generally, mergers of school districts of less than 1,500 students has some cost savings. They're minimal, but there's some cost savings. Above 1,500 students, generally, there are relatively no cost savings. So the mergers also had to raise hackles along union representation and the community. So one way to get around the merger issue is the regional high school issue. You keep your same identities.
What's preventing that if we've been talking about it
for
so
again,
long?
There might be some jobs lost because you're going from 3 high schools to basically 1 high school. But given
But then you have a sports team problem.
Well, you can have joint sport. I mean, that's actually what a lot of rural school districts are doing nowadays, is that in order to make their teams more competitive and to have a full roster, they actually are merging their sports teams because they want their kids to have the opportunity.
But this kind of thing happens slowly, Michael. I mean,
It
it's
does,
not like an
yes.
overnight kind of thing. People have to get used to it, and
Right.
they have to get comfortable with it, et cetera. But the state could be doing more, is what you're saying,
Yes.
to smooth the road and encourage
Exactly.
people to move in that direction.
Yes. I mean, this is not relatively new, but it just highlights the dramatic and the challenges that these rural school districts are facing. And I think it really does require a response from the state, in that it's a comprehensive response.
Okay, before I let you go, and just so people understand what we're talking about here, of the population of school kids in New York, what fraction of them are rural?
Well, there are 50% of the school districts in the state are considered rural.
Right, I know, but the
11%,
bulk of the kids are in New York City.
11% of the population is in rural schools.
Right.
So, but then rural schools also represent 50% of high-need school districts. So even though they represent only 11% of the total overall population of students, they do represent a large percentage of poverty kids.
Since we're talking so much about education, this would be a good time for you to weigh in on whether Cynthia Nixon should run for governor.
No comment.
Okay. Michael Borges, thank you so much
Thank
for
you
your
for
time.
having me.